Alright, so it is officially time for me to come out of the closet. You guys know me well enough at this point, but Savvy, you may be wondering, what do you mean you're going to come out of the closet? Don't you already have a ton of pride flags on display in all of your videos? Don't you already talk openly about the fact that you're a queer author? Yes, friends, of course I do. But there is another bit of coming out I need to do as well. Guess what? I'm disabled.
I'm disabled.
It must be so difficult being gay and disabled.
It's only recently that I've started publicly and openly identifying myself as disabled, but I think it's important to talk about disability as a broad spectrum in the same way that we talk about the LGBTQ community or any other demographic of people. I'm disabled and I'm proud. It's no secret that disability representation in mainstream media isn't that great, and by isn't that great, I mean is often nothing short of offensive. So when a new movie called The Unbreakable Boy came out, a story of a young man with both autism and brittle bone disease, I went into it assuming that the representation would be enraging. And, I mean, yeah, I was right. It was. And we're going to get into all of that because there's a lot wrong with this movie. But something else caught me entirely off guard throughout this process. The disabled young man in this story, which is based on the true story of a guy who's about my age now, named Austin Lorette, was by far the most relatable representation of a character that I've personally ever seen, for me personally. I legitimately felt like I understood this guy, which means that when we look at the way his story is framed and the takeaways that we're supposed to leave the movie with, well, that kind of just made it even harder for me to watch, because I realized that had I been born male and been born into this family, I would maybe have lived a very similar life to Austin. I would have been treated the same way that he was.
But it's not how it happened in the books, though. The scene in the book.
Today's video is going to be really personal, and it's sometimes emotional, but I'm going to try to keep it funny. We'll see where it goes. Overall, I want this video to be something of a resource, a place that could help bridge the gap between neurotypical and neurodivergent people and our differing communication styles. Diving into Austin's story, the story of the production behind this movie, and reading the book that it's based on has caused me to reflect a lot about my own motivations and my own behaviors, the ways I've related to neurotypical people in my life, and the places where I feel like I may have been misunderstood, and the places where, to this day, it seems like Austin may also be somewhat misunderstood as well. Most of us have grown up hearing that the golden rule is treat others the way you want to be treated. Ideas like that, plus our nature as humans, a species with very high communication capabilities, I think a lot of us naturally just assume that others will communicate in a similar way to what we individually do, or that the way that we interpret or react to something might be mirrored in another person's reaction as well. And this is why, between neurotypical and neurodivergent people, we can often face communication breakdowns, or people assuming worse intentions on someone else's part than what may actually be there. I hope you'll all hear me out through this long, somewhat personal video, and that maybe you'll walk away with a greater understanding of how I and others like me tend to think. I hope you like fast talking and a lot of tangents, because I'm not masking for this video. I'm not masking for it, and if you're genuinely interested in hearing autistic perspectives and sharing autistic stories, then you shouldn't want me to mask for this video, alright? Let's go.
I'm gay and disabled.
Hey everybody, I'm Savvy, and welcome to Savvy Writes Books. On this channel we do book reviews, media analysis, video essays, and more. If those are things you like, I hope you will click the subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and stick around on this channel. Before we get into our video, couple quick things. First of all, I want to thank my Patreon supporters who make it possible for me to continue putting out videos like this. My Patreon supporters have their names up on the screen right now, and if you head into my description below, you can see where my Patreon supporters who contribute $5 a month or more have the option to link their own stuff in my description below. If you are interested in seeing blog posts, behind the scenes stuff, occasional bonus videos, and occasional live stream recordings and things like that, you can find that all on my Patreon page as well. And the other quick announcement I have is that if you're watching this video when I intend for it to go out, which is Friday, April 11th, 2025, then I am currently right now exhibiting at C2E2 at the Chicago Comics and Entertainment Expo. So if you are in Chicago, or if you're in the area, or you're planning to go to this convention, come by and see me. We can do a little meet and greet. I'm going to be signing my books. I have homemade, like handmade friendship bracelets that we can exchange. Like, there's so much fun stuff at my booth. You can meet some of these dolls in the background. You can probably meet them in person. I imagine I'll have set them up in my booth by this point. Today's video will, of course, be reviewing the new movie, The Unbreakable Boy, starring the very breakable and very broken Zachary Levi, but this is Savvy Writes Books, a book review channel, so of course that means we're going to review the book that this movie was based on, the memoir of Austin's father, Scott Lorette. regret. The movie is unsurprisingly pretty infuriating, but the book is somewhat less so in certain areas and occasionally more so in others. The book is a very complicated, very telling piece of media that I'm really looking forward to breaking down with you all. Part 1. All the background information you need. The Unbreakable Boy was first published in 2014, a little over 10 years ago, right as Austen himself was turning 20 years old. And now, as of the movie release in the first half of 2025, Austen is now 30 years old. And I think the fact that real-life Austen is a millennial is one of the reasons that I could relate to him and the specific ways that autism is discussed in this book. I'm going to give some quick background about myself and my own experiences to frame the discussion we're going to have today and how I personally related to it, because I think my personal experiences did inform a lot of the ways that I responded to both this book and this movie. In a lot of ways, my feelings on the book and the movie are very different, but in other ways, they kind of combine together in this deep root of like just general discomfort. So now that I'm publicly identifying as a sexy disabled woman, let me tell you about my disabilities. And by the way, I'm going to specify that I am a sexy woman because we need more hot girl disabled representation. So much disability representation in movies is like, here's a boy who's no older than middle school age. What about attractive adult women? Well, we just get cast as the Manic Pixie Dream Girls instead, which is just a different story entirely that maybe I'll get into. Much like how Austen has both autism and brittle bone disease, I have both autism and pretty bad scoliosis. I too have the unique mix of bone-related issues and neurodivergence, so I was able to relate a lot to this. I also used to wonder why it was close to a decade before I required scoliosis treatment that I was already in physical therapy by age like 2. I think I was 2 when I first started physical therapy. It turns out that as a child, I needed occupational therapy because I could only walk on my toes, and I also had delayed gross motor skill development. I had to wear leg braces through the end of first grade as a way to get me like physically used to being able to use my whole feet to walk, because my brain like wouldn't let me naturally do that. I would naturally just walk on my toes. And even to this day, my limbs don't react quickly enough when my brain gives them a signal. I'll often trip and fall down out of nowhere. I tend to walk into walls. I'll randomly drop things at just random inopportune times. My grip strength will give out. My aim throwing a ball is terrible and I cannot fix it no matter what, no matter how hard I practice. My hand-eye coordination is non-existent. I can't make eye contact because it's painful. You name it. Imagine my shock when I learned that literally all these things were early signs of autism. But nobody thinks to test you for autism when it's the mid-90s and you're a girl who talks a lot, who learned to read and write early, and you don't have any trouble in school. It's just not the way that autism was discussed at that point in time, and there are pieces of Austen's story that I think do reflect that very strongly. That, and I always just tend to interpret the world very literally. A lot of people will come in my comments and be like, Savvy, this is not what this person actually meant by this. This is a bad faith interpretation or whatever, but like, that's just, I interpret things through words, through what's being said. I often have trouble picking up on the vibes or the emotions of a situation or reading facial cues or things like that. It just doesn't register for me in that same way. Then on the other hand, I'll get a lot of people who are like, okay, you're over-explaining this. You're talking too much. Why do you care so much? And it's like, no, I'm not trying to emphasize this more than anything. It's just that I have to communicate in very expansive exact words, and when others don't do that to me, I just don't know what they're talking about. Again, it's a different communication style. So anyway, that's how my brain works. This is how I process input, and to be clear, I know that's not true for every autistic person, but for me, things are often very literal. I struggle to pick up on things that aren't said aloud. Making eye contact is physically painful with most other humans, but not with dogs. With dogs, making eye contact is totally fine. I don't know. I like watching movies that have blue, purple, and green color palettes, but if they have red, yellow, or especially orange color palettes, I do not like watching that movie. I find it to be an unpleasant experience. It's why I'm obsessed with Back to the Future 1 and 2, but I don't care for 3 because it's too orange, and orange doesn't feel good. I often repeat phrases over and over. I talk really fast, and if you get me going about a special interest, you're going to want to watch out for that. My memory has always been really weirdly good, and ever since childhood, I've had an uncanny ability to just remember random dates and random details about specific dates and what's going on and specific stats of things like that. And before all the TikTok autism moms show up in my comments to tell me that I'm appropriating autistic culture or making a mockery of autism by pretending to have it or whatever, please understand that I am a 32-year-old woman, and as a result, of course, I'm not going to be anything like your 6-year-old son. But if you think I'm cool or successful in any way, then maybe hear me out, and maybe your 6-year-old son will one day grow up and have a bright future like I was lucky enough to get to have, alright? That's just my 2 cents. So here's where I really related to Austen. I'm pretty sure a reason reason that I never learned I was autistic as a child was, first, that I'm a girl and almost nobody diagnosed girls with autism in the 90s. And second, I've always been extremely social. I've always been very extroverted. I've always been very talkative. We've seen depictions of nonverbal and non-speaking autistic people in movies and books before, but rarely do we see the hyperverbal, outgoing autistic person. The autistic person who has no social anxiety, who likes talking to everyone off the cuff, the autistic extrovert. And for years, I've felt very lonely and isolated as the only autistic extrovert that I know personally. I have other friends who are neurodivergent, but they all have these moments where they're like, I need to recharge my social battery, which is something that I respect that they need to do, but have never personally felt or really understand how that feels or what it means. Austin is a lot like me. He talks a lot about his interests at length. He wears goofy hats, he dresses in colorful clothes, and he's often very excited about everything. Like Austin, in middle school, I'd occasionally get bullied for things like wearing big hats or wearing the same shirt every day. It was this shirt, by the way. This was the jacket I wore every day in middle school that I got bullied for. And when people bullied me for it, they did it in this like sarcastic way. So they would be like, hey, nice shirt that you wear every day. And I'd be like, oh my God, thank you. And like, I kind of knew that they were being mean, but like it also didn't register as malicious because it was like any interaction was still a positive experience for me. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, right? Like Austin, I often remained friendly toward bullies, not because I didn't want to stand up for myself, but because I'm a friendly person who enjoys interacting with other people and talking about my interests, such as my fashion choices and weird clothes, even when I know they're being judgmental of me. I'm still going to take the opportunity to go on at length about it. We'll get into how that plays out in the movie. My point is, I saw a lot of myself in Austin, everything from the hat collection to the vivid fashion choices in middle school, down to the special interest in movie trivia and obsession with Back to the Future. My first tattoo was the DeLorean. I proposed to Tyler with a Back to the Future themed scavenger hunt almost 10 years ago now. Watching Back to the Future on repeat every single weekend is what got me through my scoliosis diagnosis as a kid. In both my experience reading this book and watching this movie, I found that Austin made a ton of sense to me, but he didn't seem to make a ton of sense to the people around him. The text of the book and the framing of the movie both portray Austin as this enigma, this mystery, but all of his actions, even these really dramatic actions that they're choosing to show as these big moments in the book and the movie for the sake of giving this generalized portrayal of him, even those actions made perfect sense to me. I thought Austin was almost always right in the decisions he made, like they always made sense, but it feels like I, as a person who's never met him, understands him better than the book and movie about him do. It felt like I could always understand this character in spite of his portrayal rather than because of it. And I'm going to break down what I mean about that when we get into the specifics in the next section. But that's all to say that in part, while I have a ton of issues with the way the story is told, I do like Austin's portrayal because Austin is one of the few neurodivergent people in a book or movie that I actually could see myself in. It was like the first time ever groundbreaking experience for me. Plenty of other autistic people have come forward saying that they don't resonate with this depiction in the movie, and that's also understandable because autism is, as we know, a spectrum. But I do want to say that I personally did see a lot of myself in Austin. He's one of the first autistic extroverts I've ever seen portrayed in anything, and that's why I'm feeling kind of defensive of him in this video. The Unbreakable Boy, both the book and the movie, are Christian properties. The Unbreakable Boy was published by Thomas Nelson, which is the Christian imprint of HarperCollins. Who wants to guess what other book I've reviewed on this channel that was also published by Thomas Nelson? Lock in your answers. Get ready. 3, 2, 1. It was Girl Wash Your Face. The movie version of The Unbreakable Boy was released through Kingdom Story Company, which is a Christian movie division working with Lionsgate Films. Now, do I have anything against Christianity as a whole? No, of course not. I'm a believer in religious freedom. I will say, though, in my own personal journey dealing with autism, Christianity and Christian-adjacent churches never really did much for me. I am a former Catholic, and when you already have the type of brain that likes to order and categorize things and set strict rules for yourself, and then when you have a church that gives you very specific rules and tells you that your actions will always have a direct impact on God's view of you, for a young neurodivergent person that can be extremely stressful. So I haven't been a practicing Catholic in a very long time is my point. Like for me personally, I'm not involved in any organized religious groups at this point, but I have actually spent the past year or so studying the basics of Buddhism and still trying to learn more about that, and that's actually been extremely helpful to me with like making sense of the way that my brain works and trying to interpret the world around me, so that one's been helpful for me. My point is anyways, I can see how some form of religion or spirituality might become helpful when it comes to dealing with all the difficulties that can come from being neurodivergent and having a different way of thinking. In a vacuum, I don't think this book and movie having a Christian angle automatically makes it bad, but I do think the Christian messaging specifically in the way it's framed is very weird. You know those like inspiration porn type stories that take autistic people or disabled people in general and show them both as these like struggling humans who are always enduring hardship and are by default a victim, but they're also these magical beings who are on par with Jesus, like supposedly at the same time. It's that kind of story. I don't like it. I don't need someone to tell me that God gave me autism as a gift, or scoliosis for that matter. It's a weirdly dehumanizing way of seeing disabled people not as like complex individual humans with a perspective that, while potentially different than an able-bodied or neurotypical person's perspective, is still expansive and meaningful to that individual's self-actualization. I'm tired of disabled people being portrayed as side characters for able-bodied or neurotypical people to complete their own character arcs. Disabled people deserve to have their own character arcs, not to just be a prop in someone else's emotional journey. And unfortunately, that is what The Unbreakable Boy does, perhaps worse than most movies I've seen. Part 2. The movie review. The Unbreakable Boy movie version sat in development hell for nearly half a decade before finally releasing about a month ago. See, it was originally filmed back in 2020, which is now 5 years ago, but the movie somehow took 5 years between filming and release. Why is that? While it's never been outright confirmed that this is true, a lot of autistic people, myself included, have speculated that a reason for this movie's delay is that in 2021, pop star Sia released her own autism movie called Music, which was not well received, to say the absolute least. I eventually watched it because I thought it could be like a good stoner movie, if you know what I mean. And it was successful at being thoroughly unhinged. Maybe I'll review it at some point if you guys want, but I don't think it would have looked good to put out another autism movie this close after such a controversial movie that flopped so hard. The Unbreakable Boy is very different from Music. In a lot of ways, it's better, especially in terms of, you know, like the story making sense, but I think in a way that also kind of makes it worse. There are a ton of parts in this movie where you can sympathize with this family, when you can see how they are doing their best, and you might think that Austin seems like a happier guy with better accommodations than what Music got. But that can also be dangerous in its own way. A movie like Music is so egregiously unhinged that the ableism of it screams in your face. You cannot ignore it. A movie like The Unbreakable Boy, on the other hand, is competent enough in most parts to put the audience at ease, to turn off that critical part of their brains and just enjoy the movie, which does a good job of hiding how ableist it really is under the surface. In every single piece of marketing for this movie, it's advertised as a story about Austin, a story about a kid with autism and osteogenesis imperfecta overcoming the odds and living a fulfilling life, which is already kind of a stupid story. Because I'm not a big fan of inspiration porn, I don't think stories about disabled people should be whittled down to just look at how they overcame so much. If they can do it, so can you. I'd rather have stories about disabled people who face their own challenges, learn new things, take agency in their own life in pursuit of their own goals. But this imaginary version of the movie that I had in my head, one that was already an insultingly pseudo-inspirational story that portrayed disabled people as default victims, that expectation was somehow leagues better than the story we actually got. The Unbreakable Boy is not actually about Austin at all. It's about his dad, Scott, overcoming alcoholism. Honestly, the majority of the movie could exist without Austin even being on screen. If you removed Austin from the story and replaced him with a dog, you could have most of the movie be the same and it would just be closer to Marley and Me, but with more drinking, and otherwise it would be mostly unchanged. But I will say, as a quick compliment, The Unbreakable Boy is a lot better than The Blind Side, which is a very low bar to clear, but they cleared it. The Unbreakable Boy presents a father who at least means well, and when you read the book, you do get a clear picture of Scott as a dad who, while he does make a lot of mistakes, is very self-reflective and is willing to admit when he's wrong. On the other hand, The Blind Side was a movie about using the power of the Lord to groom homeless black children into playing a high-risk contact sport for your specific alma mater where you have money tied up, all the while you're pretending that the movie you financed yourself is an affront for a potentially money laundering and borderline human trafficking scam. Watch my 4-hour deep dive on The Blind Side if you want to know the whole story there. It's a doozy. Unfortunately, The Unbreakable Boy is not a movie about Austin having a character arc, learning new things about himself and the world around him, making choices that will ultimately impact his future. Nothing. This movie is about Scott, the alcoholic dad, who just happens to have an autistic son. And on the one hand, you could do that well as a concept, right? If this really is Scott's story, him having children and, the characteristics of his children would be an important part of his life. That would be key information to include. So I don't think a movie about a guy overcoming alcoholism for the sake of his kids is a bad story. That could be done well. The problem is, one, that this was marketed as a story about a disabled kid growing up and discovering his place in the world. He's supposed to be the unbreakable boy after all. And two, Austin's role in this story presents disabled people not as full humans, but as a strange combination of both a burden and a savior. Despite being a real person in real life, movie Austin is reduced to an obstacle for his father to deal with, and then a source of inspiration for his father to become better. The story only fits within the scope of how Austin factors into his father's self-improvement journey. I would much rather see this story told from Austin's perspective. For example, did you know that Austin works as a line cook at a restaurant with goals of one day becoming a head chef? You probably didn't know that because you probably didn't look at Austin's LinkedIn page, and also because the movie does nothing to deal with Austin's own goals, desires, and motivations as his own character. From the start, the movie does something extremely manipulative, and it tries to trick you into thinking that this story is told from Austin's perspective and is about him, and that's because the kid who plays Austin in the movie is narrating the background information, but a lot of stuff he narrates doesn't make sense for him to be saying. Like, would a child version of Austin be talking openly about how he was an accidental pregnancy? I don't know. Maybe his parents did tell him that. I don't know this family personally, but a lot of it felt very off, especially because once the movie gets away from Austin's voiceovers, he barely does anything. He's barely on screen. The story is about his dad. In certain parts of this section, I'm going to reference a video I saw by the channel I'm Autistic Now What, which did a fantastic breakdown of this movie and also uncovered a lot of important background information about its production and promotion, a lot of which I find extremely telling.
Jacob Laval, who plays Austin, seems like a sweet guy. He was so young when he played the role. As I say, he's grown up a lot since then. Actually, Austin's real life father, Scott Lorette, said he did initially think that Jacob Laval was autistic, but he's not.
When I first met Jacob, I thought he was autistic, and he's not.
As far as I know, he's not open about any disabilities.
As for preparing, besides that, I also got to meet the real Austin, which was really exciting because I was able to get an idea of how he behaved.
I think that could just be like a symbol of this movie as a whole. The fact that when real life Scott Lorette met Jacob Laval, the child actor who played Austin, he thought that Jacob was autistic. Jacob is not autistic. He may have some, he kind of sounds like he has a lisp, or maybe there's some sort of speaking impediment there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what his specific circumstances are, but isn't that so telling that this guy saw an actor, thought he might be disabled, and was like, oh, that's just like my son. My son also has disability. Disability is, of course, just one thing. You either have it or you don't. It's not like there are different types of disabilities or, a spectrum, perhaps. I actually think Jacob Laval did a great job playing Austin in the movie. While Jacob isn't autistic himself, he is just a kid, and I won't hold him responsible for the choices that adults make. I know that not everyone liked his portrayal of Austin, but again, as an autistic adult who finds a lot of Austin's behaviors, interests, and habits extremely relatable, I thought Jacob's portrayal was really good. If it were up to me, of course, kids wouldn't be working at all, but this is the world we're living in, and I think he did a good job, all things considered. But if you take a look at the movie poster, you will notice that Jacob Laval is not the first person credited, nor is he the second person. Nope, he's third. The unbreakable boy himself is a tertiary character in his own movie, with his dad, of course, being the real protagonist and his mom being the protagonist's love interest, of course. So while Jacob Laval did a good job, let's talk about the lead actor in this movie, the guy playing the actual main character, Zachary Levi. I didn't know much about Zachary Levi going into this movie, so I had the displeasure of learning all about this man. He seems to be most famous for voicing Flynn Rider in the movie Tangled, which was a movie I really liked, and for starring in the DC Comics movie Shazam, which I never saw. However, there's a pretty glaring thing about Zachary Levi, something that gives it really bad optics for him to be starring in a movie that's supposedly about autism. What do we think that is? Who can tell me in the comments below what the biggest, longest running conspiracy theory about autism is? What's the biggest piece of pseudoscientific misinformation that people try to spread about autism to the detriment of actually autistic people? If you guessed that autism is caused by vaccines, you would be correct. There is a thoroughly insufferable subset of the population who truly believes that vaccines cause autism, and we refer to those people as anti-vaxxers. Zachary Levi is one of those people. Let's take a quick look at Zachary Levi's Wikipedia page. In the 2024 election, Levi endorsed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. After Kennedy withdrew his candidacy, Levi endorsed Trump at a Reclaim America tour. In a 2024 episode of The Rubin Report, Levi expressed fear he might face rejection from Hollywood as a result of his endorsement, but concluded, "What is it to gain the whole world and lose your soul in the process?" Imagine playing the role of a father whose child has medical issues and various health concerns while in your heart endorsing RFK Jr., one of the biggest current threats to Americans being able to access necessary modern medicine. Just this past October, Entertainment Weekly reported on a controversy wherein Zachary Levi used the death of a fellow actor and colleague to promote his anti-vax beliefs. I know this is going to offend some people and make some people mad, and I wish it didn't. So a few weeks ago, my friend Gavin Creel died. He was 48 years old, and he was one of the healthiest people I knew. Levi noted that Creel was someone who looked after himself, ate well, and was physically fit until he was suddenly diagnosed with a rare form of sarcoma in July and died 2 months later. They knew the cost-benefit of these shots. It was garbage. Guys, it was garbage. They knew there would be plenty of side effects, including turbo cancers. They knew, he swore, and without a shadow of a doubt, I believe that Gavin Creel would be alive right now, right fucking now, if he would still be alive if that stuff didn't get put into his body. Levi openly admitted that he could be wrong about the COVID vaccine causing cancer. Both the National Cancer Institute and the American Cancer Society have publicly debunked the theory in the past, with the NCI stating that there is no evidence that COVID-19 vaccines cause cancer, lead to recurrence, or lead to disease progression. This guy. This is the guy who's playing a loving father who wants the best for his son facing difficult health conditions from a young age. This is the guy. Imagine starring in a movie about autism while holding a belief in your own head that it could have been caused by a vaccine. My personal theory is that it's more likely Austin's autism was caused by his dad, Scott, being a neurodivergent himself and refusing to admit it, but we're going to discuss that when we get to the book review in a little bit, okay? Also, around the time this movie was first releasing, Zachary Levi went on Matt Walsh's podcast to talk about, I quote, "the real reason why new movies aren't good anymore." Matt Walsh, the guy that thinks that not only do vaccines cause autism, but autism causes the transgender mind virus and we should exterminate trans people. Matt Walsh, who advocates for violence regularly on his social media, who makes bullying neurodivergent people his favorite pastime. Zachary Levi promoted his movie on Matt Walsh's channel. My point is, casting Zachary Levi as the dad in this movie was a choice, and not a great one in my personal opinion. I also found that the woman who plays Scott's mom, or Austin's grandma, in the movie is Deborah from Everybody Loves Raymond, and that was a huge disappointment because that is my favorite stoner show. Ever since I was in college and experienced my first ever bong hit that was way too big and incapacitated me while my friends wanted me to get up so we could all go to the lesbian bar, I would always put on Everybody Loves Raymond to bring myself back down to earth. The world can't feel that trippy and wrong when you're watching literally the most average show in the world, and I stand by that. So Deborah sucks, but Frank and Marie were the real appeal of that show anyway. We all know that. Rest in peace to Frank and Marie. When it comes to the promotion of this movie, there was one interview in particular that I saw that solidified for me that I needed to make this video, and that was another clip that was shown on the channel I'm Autistic Now What.
I came across this panel interview, I assume from a premiere of The Unbreakable Boy, while he's there at a premiere of a movie that is supposedly about his life, a movie that dramatizes his traumatic hospitalization that he won't even talk about in real life. So Austin's on this panel with Zachary Levi and several producers, including his father, who was an executive producer on this movie. They also cut him off whenever he's speaking.
So, but it's not how it happened in the books, though. The scene in the book.
What you're trying to say is, you ever saw Twilight, like Twilight, you're gonna love The Unbreakable.
And I've only seen a couple of Pierce movies, Twilight,
My hope is
and one other, all the Twilight movies.
that this film tonight will inspire you to wake up tomorrow.
I started tearing up when I saw this. Like, legit tears were forming in my eyes, and I was about to start crying when I saw these clips. I even left a comment on the video about it. I will link that video in this description below. I highly recommend you watch it as well because it has a lot of in-depth background information on the movie, especially because a lot of my video after this section is going to focus on the book instead. But for now, we're going to keep going on about this particular panel.
At around 16 minutes, Austin tries to recommend another movie starring Jacob Laval, who plays Austin in the movie. And once again, whoosh, the mic goes over to his father.
I have a movie to recommend with Jacob LaBelle that I've watched, and it's originally an Amazon movie, but I own it on disc.
Okay, gotta watch Hungry Boy first.
Can I say real fast though?
No, hold on. You can say that.
I'm pretty sure at this moment you can hear Austin say, "I'm sorry." I assume he's apologizing for the fact that he was trying to speak.
We've seen autism portrayed in television and other movies sometimes as well.
The visceral frustration it brought to my body to watch these people talk over Austin, it was feeling like I needed to defend myself, like I was the one being trapped and being forced to stop talking. Here's how I see it, okay? If this movie is about Austin like you're claiming it is, let him talk about whatever the fuck he wants. Oh, this guy who's autistic and whose special interest is movies is going to go on tangents and talk a lot about movies at his own movie premiere? Who could have guessed? That's a good thing, John Gunn. That's desirable, Zachary Levi. I've talked to some not autistic people about this interview, and the biggest thing I've heard in defense of the others on this panel is, maybe there was a time limit. Maybe another producer or event manager asked them to speed it up and get onto the movie already, and because Austin is really talkative, they were worried about time. I think that's true. I think that's probably the reason. I think everyone's probably right about that, but also I really don't care. Disabilities require accommodations. Neurodivergence is when your brain processes information differently from the norm. It doesn't mean your brain processes it wrong. It just means that it processes it differently from the norm. If you're going to make a movie about autism and have a real life autistic guy that it's based on there to promote it, where the fuck are his accommodations? This movie is based on his life. I mean, it's really based on his dad's life, but Austin's story is the one used to promote this movie, which would have no marketing angle without him. Austin is necessary not just for this movie's success, but in my opinion, for its existence. And if you didn't think about making accommodations for the autistic person to get to share his full perspective at the autism movie premiere, that's actually infuriating. When Austin apologized, my heart broke. Austin, you have nothing to be sorry for. As fellow Thomas Nelson HarperCollins imprint girly Rachel Hollis would say, girl, stop apologizing. The fact that Austin thought it was natural to feel remorse over speaking up and sharing his own thoughts is extremely alarming. I tried to imagine it from my own perspective. Imagine my mom wrote a memoir about what it was like for her, raising a neurodivergent child with scoliosis who was always in the hospital and in physical therapy while she herself was trying to escape an abusive relationship, trying to earn a family income as a single mom, and more, all of which would be an accurate portrayal of my real childhood, right? But imagine the movie's marketing was all about how I was the driving force to get through it. I was the inspiration that kept my mom going, and even though my medical issues were a huge expense and a huge cause of the stress, I was the inspiration at the end of the day. And then, when I'm 30 years old, sitting at the movie premiere, wanting to talk about my own life and my own reactions to what the others around me are saying, if an actor in the movie or a producer or someone were to physically take the mic away from me and interrupt me and talk over me, I would lose it. Actually, Austin's self-restraint in this moment is so incredibly admirable, and I say that because I know I would have had a vocal outburst if I were treated that way. But it's also just a really weird situation to imagine myself in because there's no version of my mom that would turn my life into a memoir in a movie because my mom is not obsessed with herself like that, and I think that's the key difference in this situation. I think a simple, I was still talking would have sufficed, and I'm kind of worried about the fact that Austin didn't seem to feel comfortable doing that. Now, again, it's entirely possible that Austin himself just doesn't want to make waves. He might be a chill guy. He might think this kind of thing isn't worth the fuss. That's possible. I don't know him personally, but he's entitled to his own opinions on those kind of things. But when I see things like that happening so often, it makes me worry that the idea that other people interrupting me is okay, or my opinions don't matter as much as everybody else's, has been normalized for him. This could be me projecting because, again, I review too many books by people who have escaped cults and things like that, but that's just the red flag that I personally saw. That's how it came across to me. So we know this movie was made by a Christian inspiration porn slot mill. It stars an anti-vaxxer who goes on cruises with the king medical crackpot RFK Jr., and its behind-the-scenes material show the movie's producers as thoroughly uninterested in understanding or listening to the real-life Austin who's right there in front of them. So what's this movie about anyway? The movie opens during a New Year's party where we see Scott Lorette, played by Zachary Levi, getting too drunk at a country club and ignoring his kids. When it's time to leave, he gets in the car to drive despite being drunk off his ass and almost kills his kids by crashing into a tree. That's our en media res opening. It's where we head into our flashback. The flashbacks are narrated by Austin just to manipulate the viewers into thinking the movie is from his perspective in any way, when in reality the overwhelming majority of scenes don't involve him and are things he would not have been able to have witnessed in real life. We learn how his mom and dad only went on a couple dates before she got unexpectedly pregnant. In In Christian media, I often notice that when someone gets pregnant accidentally, especially when they're not in a good situation to have a kid, the movie completely ignores the abortion discussion at all. It was a big thing on Seventh Heaven as well, like when people were always getting pregnant at the worst times, and I don't think the word abortion was ever once said aloud on any of the show's 11 seasons. This movie is similar. When Teresa tells Scott she's pregnant, it is instantly time to start getting used to the idea of raising a kid. That's because whether Teresa is having the baby or not is not a discussion that we will ever entertain. In real life, the couple actually did discuss whether they were keeping the baby or not, and then decided that yes, they were going to have the kid. We're going to talk about that more in the next section when we review the book, but I think it's interesting that the movie just cut that out entirely. Just from a logical perspective, you'd think that Teresa, who has osteogenesis imperfecta herself, would consider abortion, knowing that her bones break so easily and having a baby could easily like split her pelvis apart or crack all her ribs or do a ton of damage to her body. And, you know, that's a risk that she decided she wanted to take, which is great. Good for her. That's why it's called a choice. I respect that. And the book actually recognizes it as a choice, which I like. But the movie doesn't even address the physical fears that a woman with a bone condition might encounter when she's unexpectedly pregnant. But babies are a gift from God, so I guess it doesn't matter. Throughout the movie, these parents are portrayed as a book trope often used in the romance community called TSTL, which stands for Too Stupid to Live. In one scene, Teresa has to go to work or somewhere, and Scott is working from home, so she asks him to watch Austin, who at this point they've learned is susceptible to easily breaking bones, and he's a pretty high energy toddler. Scott is just kind of ignores her. He's like, yeah, okay, whatever you say. He doesn't even like look away from his work laptop, and Teresa thinks that that's a good enough acknowledgement and leaves. Scott never starts paying attention, and then of course Austin falls and breaks a bone. If only you were watching your kid with your eyes instead of absent-mindedly nodding at your wife and then forgetting about your kid. In a later scene, Teresa convinces Scott to start going to church with her shortly after they have their second child, a boy named Logan. Teresa heads into the church and Scott takes both boys to the bathroom with him. I think Logan's still a baby at this point, so Scott's like changing him on the changing table and Austin is using the bathroom stall, and then after he's done, he like bursts out of the bathroom half naked and starts running around causing chaos. And you know, which I did also find relatable. I didn't like wearing clothes as a kid. I didn't like how they felt against my body, and as an adult, it's taken me a long time to get used to clothes and to wanting to wear clothes. Like, I love fashion, I love dressing cute, I love doing my makeup and stuff, but the sensory experience of it is really horrible, so I do it like once every 1 to 2 weeks when I'm making YouTube videos. Outside of that, for the past few years, I've spent most of my time laying around my house completely naked for the most part. Recently, I've discovered more fabrics and textures that I don't mind as much, and I do wear clothes more often, but it was another way that I related to Austin. When I was a kid and didn't understand how big of a deal people make out of being naked, I would try to run around without clothes on, which would make my grandma feel scandalized. This was just another relatable moment. But then it's a huge chaos fest, right? Scott is trying to finish changing his baby while his like 3-year-old son is running around naked and causing havoc in the church, and I'm over here like, where's their mom? Why didn't she just take one of the kids? If you have a kid who's really high energy and who often makes impulsive choices that you can't expect, wouldn't you have one parent watch him while the other parent changes the baby? That just seems obvious to me, who's never had kids. There's a part in this movie where Austin tries a new medication and his body doesn't process it the right way, so the medication reacts very badly with his system and makes him have this outburst that involves him becoming physically violent against his mom and his little brother. His parents then take him to the emergency room, and pretty quickly the doctors realize that the medication isn't being metabolized properly by his liver, and that's what caused the outburst. But then the hospital recommends that they hold him in the psych ward for a few days. I think it's almost 2 weeks, and that's an extremely traumatizing thing for a kid to go through, and I can't seem to understand why the parents agreed to this. Like, the doctor just straight up told you that the medication was the problem. Once they know all the medicine is out of his system, why would he need to be in the psych ward? Why would you put your child through that? In the moment, I can imagine that this might be a mistake the parents might make and then later regret, but the movie doesn't show them ever regretting this choice. It does show that it hurts them. It shows that they don't want to do this. It makes them sad, but there's never an acknowledgement later on that their choice was in itself wrong in retrospect, and I think that would have gone a long way to show Scott's development as a person, especially since this movie's about Scott. Since Scott is the only dynamic character in this movie, the only person who goes through any legitimate change as a protagonist, if there's anything we should be focusing on, it's how Scott learned from his mistakes. And we get into that with the drinking and his process of getting sober, but we don't get it at all here, and I think that's a result of the movie treating Austin Austin as a side character in his dad's life, another prop, another piece of the obstacles his dad must overcome to complete his dad character arc. There is one subplot in this movie that I really love, legitimately, and I think it was so close to being extremely cool and based, but it fell slightly short. So there's this kid in Austin's class who likes to bully him. This kid is a taller dude. He's the kind of bigger guy who beats up on the smaller kids at school, that kind of thing. Austin loves talking to the bully because he's happy to talk to everyone, which I get because I'm the same way. Austin often refers to the bully as his friend, but his younger brother Logan sees it differently. See, Logan is even younger and smaller than Austin, so when Logan runs into the bully, he ends up in fights. The bully's always trying to beat him up, things like that. So Logan is under the impression that Austin falsely sees the bully as a friend because Austin can't differentiate between people's different types of intentions. But then we get this beautiful moment where Austin tells Logan, no, I know the bully's mean. I know he's always nasty to us, but I also know that his family's really struggling, that he's poor, that he didn't get to have Christmas this year, and I think maybe he just needs a friend. This isn't the moment that I necessarily thought was awesome entirely, but I also did kind of like this part, the part where Austin confirms that yes, he is aware of what's going on. He's perceiving that this kid is mean too. He just has a different approach to dealing with him, and that's by killing him with kindness. And that's not necessarily the right approach or the wrong approach, it's just Austin's approach, and he's entitled to that. Logan's approach, which is to try fighting back only to get squashed by this kid, that's not necessarily the wrong approach either. He's entitled to make that choice too. I thought this could have been such a nice moment if it was like, yeah, Austin sees things differently. He still perceives the world as it is. He just comes to different conclusions because autism is not an illness, it's an example of neurodiversity, and that's why having autistic perspectives in a situation is a good thing because it brings more varied human viewpoints to the surface, which results in different types of problem solving. Unfortunately, this movie just does not have that level of nuance at all, but this was a moment I loved so much. So the next day at school, Logan has the bully come down to the principal's office, and the bully's like, what are you doing? Why did you bring me down here, you little twerp? You know, typical bully things. And Logan gives him a late Christmas present. He's wrapped up his skateboard and gives it to the bully, and he's like, my brother told me your family's poor and you don't get to have Christmas, so I wanted to give you my skateboard. And I was like, holy shit, I have never seen a bully get owned that hard in a movie before. I burst out laughing when I saw this. I was screaming at how base this was, right? Like, this bully is your stereotype of my home life sucks, so I'm gonna take it out on other people who can't defend themselves. And then the smaller guy you pick on is like, here, have a Christmas present from me. I know you're a bully because you're jealous that I actually have a family who loves me and I get to have Christmas, so I thought I'd rub that in your face a bit and make it look like a kind gesture so that I can't get in trouble for it. I was losing it, you guys. That bully got fucking wrecked, okay? Unfortunately, this is an inspirational Christmas movie with no nuance whatsoever, so the bully is just like, wow, no one's ever been this nice to me before, and then he becomes friends with Austin and Logan. Like, sure, if that actually happened in the long run, that's great, but why won't this movie acknowledge how Logan absolutely destroyed this kid? That was like a 4D chess level of comeuppance that the movie wants so badly to frame through this inspirational Christian lens that we lose how totally awesome that moment could have been. There's a point in this movie where Scott loses his job and the family starts struggling financially. The parents talk about what they could cut back on, and Teresa suggests Scott's country club membership, and I was like, you're raising two kids, one of whom has exorbitant medical bills, you're both currently unemployed, and you have a country club membership? I know a grand total of 0 people who have a country club membership in real life or have ever belonged to a country club. That's like on par with that one drill tweet that's like, please help, my family is dying. It's just another example of those parents being too stupid to live. We wrap back around to the New Year's party where Scott gets too drunk and then tries to drive home with his kids in the car, crashes into a tree, and then wakes up in bed the next morning with Teresa pouring a bucket of cold water on him and telling him that she's going to divorce him unless he stops drinking. I thought that would be really satisfying if then Scott, got his driver's license suspended or had to spend a week in the psych ward himself, maybe, since alcoholism is an addiction and addictions can be classified as a mental illness also. But no, instead Scott just decides to find Jesus, which is basically the same thing according to this movie. He starts going to Alcoholics Anonymous, which I know is an organization heavily affiliated with Christianity, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because, like I said, building community through your church and trying to develop some sort of meditative or spiritual practice can absolutely help as you're trying to overcome something like an addiction. It's just that Jesus alone isn't what's going to save you. Like, maybe also the DMV should take your license away if you drove drunk and crashed into a tree and almost killed your children. I just don't personally have any patience in my life for drunk driving. I think it's inexcusable. Scott does get sober, which is great. Overcoming addiction is not easy. I'm glad the movie does show someone successfully quitting drinking and learning to take better care of their family in the process. And I do legitimately want to congratulate the real life Scott Lorette for being sober for like 15 15 years now. That's really impressive, and I'm glad he was able to reach that point. I just think that making this a Christian movie and releasing it through a Christian film studio, all while pretending this is actually a movie about autism or a kid overcoming obstacles to live his best life, it bamboozled me, okay? And it did a lot to really underplay Austin's role in his own life. I will say, though, the book was slightly better. Part 3, the book review. Oh, so controversial and so brave, right? A booktuber coming on YouTube to say the book was better than the movie. Well, I'm also a movie buff, so sometimes I think the movie's better than the book. Not with this one, though. Discussing this book is going to be kind of complicated, in part because I have a lot to criticize about it, but I'm also really glad I read it. The book confirmed for me that I relate to Austin even more than I did in the movie, and it helped me see places where the communication was breaking down between an autistic guy and his not autistic dad. I will say whether or not Scott himself is autistic is something I left this book wondering. We're going to get into that. My point is, this book caused me to reflect a lot on my own behaviors, my own motivations, and my own relationships, as well as how neurotypical people may be receiving them and how they may not realize how I perceive their actions in return. It showed me that you can take two people whose brains process the world very differently from one another, and while they may both speak the same language on a linguistic level, the words they say may carry very different meanings from what they interpret in each other. So let's dive into the specifics of the book. Up front, I'm going to say this book was not an autism-friendly read, at least for me, by which I mean I had to run multiple things in it by non-autistic people in my life to have them explain what a certain sentence meant or a certain indicator was getting at when there was something that couldn't be taken even close to literally, and I'm someone who professionally breaks down and examines books. I'll show you what I mean. It kind of reminds me how even after some people did watch Sia's movie Music and give it a chance, a lot of autistic people were like, so you made a movie with big sounds and flashing lights that many autistic people would find painfully overstimulating, so your movie's actually not for autistic people? Because many of them would find this movie physically painful to watch. There were a few moments like that in this book where I was like, what the fuck does this line mean? And then I'd have to get people to explain how certain sentiments relied on this understanding of normie social cues that I just don't have. I'm just saying that it's a little weird that a story about how an autistic guy saved your life is written in a way that isn't accessible to a lot of autistic readers, but that could just be me. You can let me know in the comments below when we get into the details if you saw it the same way or not. Okay, I hate how this book opens. It opens with positive reviews, like a lot of books do, but these reviews are so fucking cringe, okay? They made me think this book was going to be way more offensive than it actually ended up being. Austin's story reminded me that God intricately and intentionally designed each one of us for his wonderful purposes. As a mom, I was empowered to simply place the hopes, dreams, futures, and lives of my kids at his feet, and then prayerfully watch miracles unfold. As an educator, this story inspired me to see that each child's unique God-given gifts, talents, and even struggles work together to reveal an incredible potential when nurtured. And as a woman, I was moved by this heart-wrenching, make me laugh, make me cry, make me want to be better story that gave me a glimpse of the incredible power and creativity that is our God. Erin McPherson, author of the Christian Mama's Guide series. Okay, so obvious critique out of the way. You guys know I'm not a fan of the whole autism is a gift from God. God made us unique with special abilities in his image. Beyond that, I could not understand what she was trying to say here. She's like, as a woman, I was moved by this book. What does that have to do with being a woman? I thought she might be like, as a woman, I enjoyed seeing a father's perspective because it's one that I don't have because I'm not a father. But she just said that as a woman, she was generally moved by this book. How does gender factor into this situation? Again, for the not-tistic folks out there, I want to be clear that I'm not asking these questions rhetorically. I genuinely don't know what she means. And if any of you know what she means, you're welcome to explain it to me in the comments below, but please do understand that for some autistic people, this sentence reads as absolute nonsense. It is straight up word salad. I didn't ask anyone to explain this one to me before I made this video, but that was the first thing that jumped out at me is like, this book really isn't for me, is it? So then we get into the prologue of the book, which is the only part that Austin himself wrote. I won't comment on Austin's own writing too much right now, but when we get into some of the ways that Scott portrays him in this book, we're going to need to look back at Austin's writing to see exactly how that compares, if you know what I mean. So here's what Austin writes. I have autism. Autism stinks. Some autistic kids can't talk, but I can. Sometimes I make up words. It calms me down to say words over and over again. Sometimes I say bad words and I have a hard time listening. I wish it would stop. I wish I was a better person. People don't understand how much I try. I freak out over little things and get mad a lot when feelings come. I don't like my diseases. Logan is the lucky one because he can ride a dirt bike or skateboard. He's so lucky. No autism. Sometimes I wish Mom would just put me back in her belly. Okay, I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I think it's fair that Austin wants to talk about the difficulties that autism and brittle bone disease bring into his life. Autism is a disability, and as such, it often causes difficulties for neurodivergent people trying to move through a largely neurotypical society. And if his opinion on his own experiences is that he wants to tell us about the difficulties he's had and the ways that autism annoys him personally, he has every right to do that. I'm glad he felt comfortable sharing it with us. I also related to a lot of what Austin says here. I also have a hard time listening. Autism, ADHD, and other neurodivergences can come with sensory processing issues, which can include auditory processing problems. I have auditory processing issues myself, and I often can't hear or fully comprehend other people when they're talking to me, which leads me to just constantly asking people to repeat what they said, sometimes 4 or 5 times, just to hear a simple sentence and be able to parse it in my brain. It can annoy other people. It can frustrate me as well. I get it. Like Austin, I also make up words. I repeat a lot of words and phrases over and over again. You guys only see the edited stuff I put up on YouTube, and I still get a lot of comments about being repetitive and saying a lot of things a lot there. But if you spent an hour with me in real life, you'd never want to play a drinking game that includes a rule like take a shot whenever I say, and you did it at my birthday dinner without any context.
And you did it at my birthday dinner.
I have a lot of vocal stims, and that's why scripting out these videos ahead of time can be helpful. So on the one hand, I'm appreciative of Austin's honesty, and I can relate to a lot of his experiences. On the other hand, the level of self-loathing we have here is alarming. Yes, autism is difficult sometimes. To straight up say, autism stinks, I wish mom could put me back in her belly, my brother's luckier than me because he doesn't have to have autism, that's kind of concerning. Of course, Austin is entitled to whatever his own feelings are on the topic, but imagine how most people would react if this were any minority other than autism. Imagine if this were a Christian dad writing a book about his gay kid, and the kid was like, being gay sucks. Being gay makes everyone think I'm weak and sinful. I wish I could be straight like my brother because he's so lucky to get to live a normal life. Yes, it is important to acknowledge the difficulties that come from having to navigate the world while being part of a marginalized group, but if your conclusion at the end of it all is, I wish I could just be an entirely different person, a lot of people would be like, wait, why? Wouldn't you, instead of wishing you were straight, wish the world was less homophobic so you could be yourself in peace? Reading this just made me wonder if in real life, like in the movie, Austin's role is still being reduced to that of a character. Throughout this entire book plus the movie, Austin is portrayed as this really positive guy who always knows how to have fun. He makes the best of every situation, but when I read this passage, it made me wonder, does he feel like he's pressured to have to perform positivity all the time because it's what others expect and want from him? After all, the guy's dad did kind of build an entire franchise out of the fact that Austin's positivity and different outlook on the world saved him from a life-threatening addiction. Does Austin now feel like he has to take on that role of a positive force, of a savior in others' lives? Has anyone ever told him that while autism will come with inherent difficulties, that it's another fact about him as a whole person, the same way that your gender, your race, your sexual orientation, your country of origin, the generation you were born into, those are just other parts of what makes you you as well. Anyway, keep in mind the fact that Austin does openly have a tough time with autism sometimes as we read the way his dad writes about him, which isn't always in line with that. Chapter 1 of this book is called In the Closet, and I thought it was going to be a gay reference, but it's not. The fact that in the closet is such a common phrase among LGBTQ people doesn't seem to have registered with Scott, because the chapter is called In the Closet, like no big deal.
It's like no big deal. Like sucking dick and cock.
The chapter is actually about how dad has to hide in the closet because sometimes Austin is too demanding by talking too much, so we're off to a great start. And to be clear, I get that parents of course need time apart from their kids, whatever. We do end up getting a gay reference shortly after this, but it's never once connected to the chapter being called In the Closet, and it feels like a real missed opportunity. Life was good. I was 29 years old, an Iowa boy living in Charlotte, North Carolina. When I first met Teresa, I thought she was pretty cute, but she thought I was gay. I was blessed with considerable self-esteem, so it didn't bother me too much. I'm glad to hear that, Scott. I'm glad that someone thinking you could be gay didn't bother you too much. And that's because of your high self-esteem and not because being gay is not a negative thing to begin with. Unlike in the movie, which is very Seventh Heaven coded, in real life, Teresa does consider getting an abortion and then decides against it. Teresa felt unprepared for motherhood, and she made an appointment for an abortion. I swore I would never have kids, and here I was, 27 years old, just met this guy, and fell hard for him, and I couldn't believe I was pregnant, she later told me. She felt alone and afraid, and wasn't sure how she could make it all work. But she couldn't go through with the abortion. I can't end the life of this baby God gave me, she thought, and canceled the appointment. Yeah, I personally, as a woke soy leftist child-free cat lady cuck, do cringe a bit at the whole, but the baby was a gift from God thing. But not that much, right? Like, I think that was a valid decision of her to make. I'm not personally Christian, but Teresa's Christian, and she always has been, and I get how if religion is a big part of your life and you see your baby legitimately as a gift from God, and you keeping that baby would be most fulfilling for you, then that's what you should do. Have the baby. You have my blessing. In fact, I'm glad you did, because Austin seems like a cool guy, and he's glad he's here on Earth with us. That's why we call it pro-choice, because I respect and support Teresa's choice, and based on the fact that she considered an abortion, I can assume she would respect my choice as well, and that's why everyone's cool here. Another point for the book being better than the movie. After this, we start to get into something I kept waiting for the book to fully flesh out, but it never does. While, of course, neuroscience is still discovering new things all the time, and we don't necessarily have a complete picture of exactly how autism forms in every case just yet, it is widely believed that there's a genetic component, that autistic parents have a higher chance of having autistic children, which makes sense. You know, parents often pass their DNA down to their children. I say often instead of always because some people are adopted. Anyway, we know that Teresa passed brittle bone disease down to Austin, but there's a part of me that wondered, is it possible that one of the parents is also autistic, maybe in, you know, such a place on the spectrum where their specific autistic characteristics don't impede their daily life that strongly, so maybe they never noticed it before. Now, disclaimer, okay? I am not a medical professional in any way, shape, or form. I am not diagnosing anybody. I have never met any of these people personally, and I do not know the specifics of their life. But if I'm going to analyze this book on its own, as its own piece of media, it really feels like throughout the book, we're using foreshadowing to build towards Scott realizing that he has autism as well, and that Austin probably got it from him. There are so many bits of foreshadowing for this that ended up going nowhere, that now it's just leaving me wondering if Scott himself doesn't realize how neurodivergent he comes off in this book. Like, remember when we reviewed The Straight Girl's Guide to Sleeping with Chicks? There's something to be said for books where the author just sounds like they're in complete denial about themselves. Here's an example. Right before I got off the plane, I started tapping my toes inside my shoes. First 2 taps on the left, 2 on the right, then 3 taps on the left, 3 taps on the right. However many times I tap on one side, I have to tap on the other. I've always done this. It helps me stay calm, and I was about to step off the plane into the cool Omaha air. Okay, I have to do this too. I have to tap things equally on both sides. And I have autism. Shortly after this, Scott says, I did work hard at school and made good grades, but I was a little ADD-ish and learned to tap my toes or hum quietly to keep myself focused. A little ADD-ish. Scott often refers to himself as kinda ADD or a little ADD-ish throughout this book. I can never tell if he's saying that he legitimately does believe he's neurodivergent himself, or if he's saying, OMG, I'm so ADD, in the way that people used to say it as a throwaway comment when they're struggling to focus on something. Like, most people know it's kind of mean to say those things nowadays. This book is more than 10 years old, and the level of mental health discourse we've had in recent decades has evolved a lot in a pretty monumental way, so I don't really know how he meant it. But it did make me perk my ears up, especially when right after this, Scott says, when I drove up to my parents' home, a large 2-story white frame house, I practically held my breath while my mom and dad hugged me. I followed them inside and sat down at the table with mom for a glass of pop. Dad wandered out to his workshop in the garage. He's probably a little ADD-ish too. Okay. So maybe your dad is a little neurodivergent, maybe you are too, and now your son has autism. Wow! Again, if Scott were to later in this book come to the conclusion that he is also neurodivergent, this would be great foreshadowing, but since that realization never comes, it feels like he's blatantly lacking in self-awareness. Later, Scott says, I've always had lots of energy and 4 or 5 thoughts bouncing around at the same time inside my head, but with mountain biking, you have to concentrate or you'll crash. The danger helps me focus and keeps my ADD tendencies trailing along in the dust. This has to be intentional, right? I cannot square how Scott chose to include all these details in the book, yet regularly goes on about how Austin is so different from him and he's a mystery and his outlook is just like nothing he's ever seen before. Come on, Scott, you gotta look inward, man. Chapter 12 is called My Own Little Rain Man. I'll just leave that there for a second to marinate. In this chapter, Scott and Teresa take Austin to get evaluated by mental health professionals, and I found these chapters really relatable too. They talk about how Austin has to do tests with tangrams, which brought me right back to my childhood. While I was never given an autism assessment as a kid, I was given a lot of like intelligence tests because I did need to get an IEP at school. I think when I was 11, I got a test that said my IQ was 140, and now my mom thinks I'm a literal genius, so it's like really weird. I'm only smart in certain areas. Austin had a relatable experience here too as well, right? He does the tangram tests, which involve getting these blocks with different shapes, and then the test proctor will show you a new shape you have to form with those shapes, and then it like tests your reasoning skills, right? Like me, Austin did really well on this test. The book says, I was fascinated as I watched Austin work on the test. He was a boy totally driven and engaged in a test of his own internal will. When he was trying to solve the given puzzle, it was as if we didn't exist and nothing else mattered. Austin was in a separate world, temporarily on a different plane of existence. Test results showed high artistic and creative scores, and Austin also had highly developed skills for visual deduction. He could see, remember, and reconstruct patterns and cycles. One night, Teresa came across a Time magazine article about the alarming rise in the number of children with autism. Okay, couple things here, right? So first of all, this was another thing that was super relatable to me. I had this exact experience. I've always been really good at memorizing and repeating patterns. I scored very high with creativity and visual deduction as well. And then after learning more, they realized that Austin might be autistic, right? The part that feels outdated is when Scott and Teresa described the article they read as the alarming rise in the number of children with autism. This is such a common misconception that people have. There isn't really any evidence to suggest that more people have autism now than had it in previous generations. What the evidence does suggest is that most psychologists and neuroscientists have a greater understanding of autism now. As a result, they know how to better look for it. They can see the symptoms more clearly. When more people understand the symptoms of autism, more people will get tested for it, meaning more people will get diagnosed. That doesn't mean that there's a rise in the total number of autistic people, just that a lot of autistic people who in generations past wouldn't know that they had autism, they now get to know that and they get to adjust their routines accordingly. Scott and Teresa start to suspect that Austin might have Asperger's, which is an outdated diagnosis, but keep in mind this part of the book takes place in the late 90s, so that is absolutely what a doctor would likely suggest to them at the time. To be honest, if I'd gone through this process back then, back at this time, I probably would have also gotten diagnosed with Asperger's. We don't use that diagnosis anymore for a few reasons. First, because autism itself is such a broad spectrum that you can't really divide it that clearly into different subgroups. Each person's strengths, weaknesses, and difficulties and abilities, they're going to be so varied that it's a little reductionist to try to group it so exactly and have a cutoff like that. The second reason is, of course, that Hans Asperger had some ties to, the Nazis back in World War II, and that he maybe a little bit enjoyed separating the Asperger's patients from the rest of the autism patients to decide who was quote-unquote functional enough to be imprisoned in a labor camp versus who should just die. And a lot of autistic people don't like to honor a time when we were being divided up to be either enslaved or genocided. As much as I wanted to ignore my son's quirks, I couldn't. His strange behaviors began to assemble themselves into the tangram for autism, although it was still unclear what variety he had. It was time I listened to Teresa. These weren't growing pains. Something was wrong with Austin, beside the brittle bone disease, that is. Again, autism is not a disease, it's a neurotype, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't come with its own difficulties. It just means that it's a core part of who a person is. It doesn't kill them. It doesn't progress like a virus or a cancer would. It doesn't get cured with medicine. It's a demographic of people. I will give Scott the benefit of the doubt and assume that his thought of something was wrong with Austin is speaking to his mindset at the time, meaning in the late 90s when Austin was a kid versus now. And in a memoir, it makes sense to talk about your mindset at the time, even if that was a flawed mindset that you learned from. In some ways, Scott definitely does learn from this flawed mindset, and that's where I have to give him credit. He is a pretty self-reflective guy who, for the most part, is willing to own up to his own mistakes and faults, which is better than a lot of the main character syndrome memoir writers we get. But considering the way that Austin writes in the prologue about hating his own autism and the way Scott continues to write about Austin as an enigma throughout the book, I do worry that maybe Scott still thinks there's something wrong with him. So then we get to the scene where Austin takes a medication that doesn't work for him, has an outburst, becomes physically violent with his family, and ends up going to the psych ward. Again, I'm not sure why he had to go to the psych ward. Here's how Scott explains it. After an examination, doctors not only noticed the obvious behavioral symptoms, but also determined the right side of his body wasn't functioning correctly and seemed partially paralyzed. Blood work showed that his liver wasn't properly metabolizing the new meds. They wanted to keep him in the hospital until the medication flushed out and his body detoxified, then start over with a reassessment and a new course of treatment. We agreed. I felt weary and knew he needed help, but then the doctors explained that they were going to admit him to the psychiatric ward. What? My 7-year-old son in the psych ward? Okay, to be clear, Austin is not being ordered by a court of law to go to the psych ward. The doctors are suggesting it. But if these parents already know that until Austin was on this medication, which the doctors have just proven was the cause of the problem, that he never acted like this before, why would they agree to put him in the psych ward? I will give Scott a little credit here, okay? He was in a difficult position at the time. He's not a doctor, right? He's a layman taking his son to the emergency room, panicking because he doesn't know what's wrong. And so in his position, of course, he's going to do whatever a medical professional suggests because this isn't his area of expertise. I just wish that later in the book, Scott had realized that sending Austin to the psych ward was a mistake. Scott's pretty upset about it at the time, but he never has a moment where he acknowledges that, well, while he did mean well at the time, that he may have made the wrong choice. And nowadays, with the knowledge he has, he might make a different choice. There isn't much of a reflection on that specifically. Instead, Scott just starts thinking about God. The more I prayed, the more desperate I felt. It was as if God were off duty, not available in that particular moment. We heard nothing from the hospital, no hint that Austin was going to be okay. I resorted to bargaining. God, if you're really there, you'll help Austin. If you help him, heal his body and give him back his mind, I believe in you. God, if everything turns out all right, I will be so thankful. I'll never forget you or what you did for us. I'll stop drinking so much, and I'll start going to church more often. Wait, church? Where did that come from? I still rarely joined Teresa and the boys at church. I had too many important things to do, like ride my mountain bike. My relationship with God was fragile and volatile. Most of the time I wondered where he was. So this is, of course, foreshadowing for Scott to later have a moment where he decides to turn his life around and spend more time with his family at church instead of mountain biking, things like that. In this section, Scott does know that this is not the right way to be, but he never comes full circle on his regret for letting Austin get involuntarily committed. Instead, we just get more of viewing Austin as this perfect Christ-like figure who, of course, has a wonderful time in the psych ward because he has the most positive attitude ever. I'd been so worried about Austin, but it turns out I didn't need to be. While I'd been completely lost, he was meeting his new challenge with lightness and joy, almost as if it was an adventure. He didn't really understand why he was there, but he was making the best of it, and he'd already made fast friends. It still doesn't make sense to me, but somehow Austin was the strong soul in this trying time. Who else could see a psych ward lockdown as a chance to make new friends? Austin's stay at Presbyterian Hospital was 10 long days. After that first visit, we returned every day and were buzzed in through the vault door at 4:20 p.m. We learned that our visits were dependent on Austin's behavior and progress, and since he was doing well, we were always able to see him. He seemed pretty happy and told us he liked the food, although he'd made a few suggestions to the staff about how to improve some of the entrees. By the last day, though, he was ready to come home. We arrived excited and signed the papers for his release. When he came out, we wept, hugged him, stroked his head, looked in his all-blue eyes. He came with us, and he didn't say much until we got in the car. On the way home, we stopped for lunch at Shomar's, our favorite Greek food stop. Austin ordered calabash shrimp, hush puppies, fries, coleslaw, and a strawberry shake. And then he said the only thing he has ever said about his lockdown. I am not going back there. Can I have some ranch dressing, please? I didn't know what to say. If there's anything I can say about my own experience being autistic, and also my experience having a lot of autistic friends, it's that a lot of us communicate very literally. We say what we mean. We don't cover our words and implications and innuendos, and at times it gets us in trouble because people see the brutal honesty thing as being an asshole instead of like that's just our default way of communicating. We know that Austin tends to communicate literally because Scott tells us that throughout the book, and I think Austin himself even acknowledges it. Here, Austin is saying verbatim to his dad, I am not going back there. What do we think that means? Do we think I am not going back there means that Austin had a great time in the psych ward and made tons of new friends and had such a positive attitude because he's always having fun no matter what, like Scott told us one page earlier? No. It means that he never wants to go back there because that's what he said. And Scott, you aren't listening. Maybe with your own, as you call them, ADD-ish tendencies, you also might have auditory processing issues. Actually, no, that's too charitable for this particular instance because you clearly did hear him. You heard him and you remembered it well enough to write in your memoir, yet you clearly didn't comprehend it. This part hurts so much to read because I have had many instances of telling people my feelings very exactly and very directly and then still wanting to read between the lines or figure out what I really meant by that. A lot of people like to say actions speak louder than words, and to that I like to say I'm autistic. I'll say the words I mean. Sometimes my actions are just involuntary stims or my lack of limb control. Actions don't always speak louder than words. Sometimes you just have to listen to people and take them at their word, especially if there's someone you love and trust who hasn't made a habit of lying to you in the past. Austin went to the psych ward 12 years before this book was published, and in those 12 years of Scott getting to know his son better, getting sober, finding Jesus, reflecting on his life, and writing a book about it all, he somehow still hasn't realized that Austin had a bad time in the psych ward, even after he literally said it to his face immediately after leaving. I personally get really sensitive about people not listening to others or refusing to believe their own emotions or perspectives, or people who think they know someone's feelings better than they do, because that's been used against me many times throughout my life by people who meant well but weren't willing to understand that I process information and communicate differently than they do. Like Austin, I'm always going to be friendly. I'm always going to be high energy and outgoing because that's my personality. That's just how I am. If I have a friendly personality in a situation, but I tell you afterward that I had a horrible time and was actually struggling a lot in that situation, what I mean is that I had a horrible time. I mean what I said. I was still friendly during that time because I'm always friendly. That's just how I act. Austin also seems to be a kind of guy who's always friendly and likes to talk regardless of the situation. That doesn't mean he's having fun, especially when he states that in no uncertain terms. Oh my god, this is infuriating. Scott's conclusion from this is not that Austin was wronged, but that everyone needs Jesus. He got louder, as he always does. He can be relentless. Dad, can I have some ranch dressing? I couldn't believe it. Austin had just been through the kind of trauma no kid should ever have to experience, but he was able to go on as if nothing much had happened. Even now, he wasn't afraid to ask for what he wanted, and he kept asking. Then something clicked. If I wanted to know what God was all about, I'd have to walk up to his door, no matter how big or scary it was, and knock on it, and keep knocking on it, raising my voice and asking for what I needed. If it worked for Oz, it might work for me. The next Sunday, I was in church with Teresa and my 2 boys. For the moment, I was resolved to make God a bigger part of my life. So Scott recognizes that Austin's strength here is asking for what he wants. Scott knows that Austin doesn't have any qualms about saying what he really thinks. Yet, from this situation, he does not deduce that that means he should believe Austin about hating the psych ward, and instead concludes that it means he himself needs to start asking God for things and should go to church. Buddy, come on, I know you can do better than that. The next paragraph I'm about to read, I think, is super telling, and in my opinion, it gets to the root at everything wrong with this book and movie counterpart. Ready? As his dad, I've tried and tried to figure him out. I've read all the recommended autism books, scoured the websites, talked to other parents, and stayed up many a night munching on my goldfish crackers and thinking about neurodiversity and the issue of would I fix him if I could. But most of the time I'm still clueless as to why Austin does what he does. Trying to understand Austin is like trying to capture a shadow. You see it, you think you can grab it, you reach out, and it's gone. Am I supposed to figure him out? Is that my job as his dad? Because if it is, I'm not doing so good. Austin's behavior is often just a mystery. Okay, let's recap. Scott has tried 1. Reading books about autism, 2. Reading websites about autism, 3. Talking to other parents, presumably parents of autistic kids, 4. Thinking about whether or not he would choose to fix Austin. And after those 4 steps, he's concluded that he is clueless as to Austin's motivations and that his behavior is, quote, just a mystery. It's like that Simpsons quote, we've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas. Scott, bro. Buddy, there's one extremely obvious thing you haven't done. Have you ever, once in your life, tried talking to another autistic adult? Ever. In the book and the movie, Scott never seems to know any autistic people other than Austin. And maybe in real life he does, I don't know, but if he does, he never told me in the pieces of media that he's choosing to publicize. This was such a glaring hole that I don't see how anyone could ignore it. You never once thought to seek out an adult who has autism, talk these things through with them and see if they can help bridge that gap in communication. You know that some autistic people grow up to be therapists, right? Why couldn't you look for a therapist who also has autism? And yeah, this was the early 2000s at this point, and we didn't have all these fancy websites where we can filter everything we want in a medical professional, so it would have been a lot harder than it was now in 2025, right? But did you ever think of trying? If Scott sees this video, I want him to know that I am open to talking. Scott, if you ever want to sit down with me, an autistic adult who relates to a lot of Austin's behavior, leave me a comment on this video, send me an email at the address in my description below. I'm genuinely open to talking about this. The process of watching this movie, reading this book, and scripting this video has caused me to conclude something pretty big. The reason that I'm able to advocate for my own needs and make my motivations clear to other people is not because I'm less autistic or more functional than someone like Austin is. It's because I'm a professional writer. I've dedicated my entire life to becoming an expert at communicating in words. I'm a better writer than Austin is, and that's because he's not a writer. I'm probably a better writer than Scott too, because he worked with a journalist co-writer on this book, and I think the competent writing probably came from her. My point is, we all have different strengths. I guarantee Austin is way better at cooking than I am. He's also better at archery, and from what I've read in this book, he's way more organized than I am. So I would ask him for help on those type of things. But Scott, if you ever need help having an autistic person clearly break down for you in words why certain motivations get lost in translation, please reach out to me. It doesn't have to be me. Find another autistic writer, reach out to them if you want, or an autistic motivational speaker, just some kind of professional communicator. There are tons of us out here, and many of us want to help. We want people to understand us better. Why the fuck didn't you think to ask one of us? Why is it that people's last resource for learning about autism is autistic people? We know it better than anyone. The next page I also found relatable. One of the compliments I will give Scott is that throughout this book, he is pretty open-minded to changing changing his perspective on various issues, to reflecting on his own faults, to learning from them, and to admitting when he's wrong. That's to say he legitimately does seem like a dad who really does mean well, and I don't think he's ever malicious. I think he's ignorant, but he's working on it, and one of the reasons I'll give him credit is because of this page. The more I research and study autism and try to uncover the secrets behind Austin's behaviors, the more I'm coming to see him as someone who doesn't necessarily need fixing. I'm beginning to see my son as someone I need to better understand and accept instead of continually trying to change him as if something is broken and wrong. I'm fascinated with the idea of neurodiversity, a new word being batted around the special needs community. My own interpretation is the idea of simply accepting differences in how people function and appreciating people for who they are, not what disorder or diagnosis they've been labeled with. My son is not abnormal, broken, or disabled, just different. Who is to say what my son is seeing, feeling, experiencing, and saying is wrong or abnormal? Maybe Austin is doing everything in just the right way, the way he's supposed to. Why should I be angry, frustrated, ashamed, or afraid to shout it from the rooftops? If the legions of experts and clinicians are having such a hard time figuring out this thing called autism, maybe they never will, and maybe they aren't supposed to. Maybe God made Austin and every other person like him exactly the way they are meant to be. I liked most of this, right? I like that while Scott previously wondered if there was something wrong with Austin or if he needed to be fixed or cured, now he's like, wait, no. That's just what makes my son who he is, and I love him for who he is. I'm glad that Scott eventually got there. It's not always an easy journey because people Scott's age, the boomers and the Gen Xers, they grew up with a lot less autism awareness and understanding, so I can see how he may have just legitimately not understood it. But the fact that he's open-minded and willing to change his perspective really does go a long way. I'm not as big of a fan of making it all about God. That's his thing, but okay. And I'm not really a fan of him saying he's not disabled. Autism is a disability. Disabilities are things that impact how you are able to move through the world in your daily life. And when the world views neurotypical behaviors as the default, it does make it more difficult. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with him, but it does mean that there's going to be more difficulties and he's going to require accommodations. And that's why a lot of us do advocate for the language of saying, yes, we are disabled, because that means that we're able to request and advocate for disability accommodations, if that makes sense. But that's kind of a nuanced thing. Scott's sentiment here overall, I absolutely agree with. So let's talk a bit about the family's money problems. Even though I had a steady job blessed with really nice bonuses, money was becoming a problem, the red ink threatening to drown out the black in our checkbook. Part of it was my fault. I'm a gearhead, and I like to have the right equipment for whatever new hobby I take on, so I not only kept myself outfitted with mountain bikes and golf clubs, but I also took up fly fishing and model airplanes and helicopters. Then there were the watches. Okay, in our discussion of the movie, we already discussed how stupid Scott is for keeping a country club membership when his family is struggling, but here, that's not what I want to talk about. Here, I want to get back to my original suspicion that Scott was trying to foreshadow his own conclusion that he's also neurodivergent, which he never does, but come on! He was struggling to save money because he's way too into specific gear with the specs he likes that he needs to collect, which includes a hobby for building model airplanes and helicopters. Really? Again, I'm not a medical professional. I don't know Scott personally. I'm not diagnosing him with anything. Neurotypical people can, of course, have hobbies like building model kits too. That's fine. I'm just saying that when you're writing a book, and when the themes in that book include things like how your wife genetically passed a bone disease onto your son, and how you have ADD-ish tendencies, and you can't stop yourself from impulse buying model kits, Scott, my dude, you can't blame me for thinking you're about to reveal your own autism. You're setting it up so perfectly in the writing. I feel like I'm one of my own middle school bullies calling myself gay before I could realize they were right. Scott then says this: I walked my usual OCD way, taking exactly 2 steps between every single sidewalk square. I was in a pensive mood, thinking about the move and my job change. Now, Scott is suspecting he might have OCD. It's almost like, get this, maybe you're neurodivergent too. Suddenly something occurred to me. Austin will never need to find himself. Unlike most teenagers, he already knows who he is. He's comfortable in his own skin, and he fully inhabits each moment, no matter where he is or who he's talking to. It's like a state of hyperfocus. Austin will immediately become consumed with any new person. Scott, that's not really how this works. You're right that, if I take your storytelling at its word, that Austin does seem to be more outgoing than most people and have higher self-confidence than the average teenager. That does not mean that he will never need to find himself or already knows everything about who he is. As a teenager, I was pretty much exactly like Austin. I also had naturally very high self-esteem. People would always remark on how confident I seemed, and I didn't really understand why, because why wouldn't I be confident? I'm smart and I'm beautiful and I'm good at a ton of things. What's there to hate myself about? But that doesn't mean I never had to find myself. I've had many crises of identity over the years. Through it all, I've remained friendly, outgoing, and confident, and I've continued to be the kind of person who will talk your ear off or make friends with random strangers, but that doesn't mean I don't also work at regularly trying to understand my own self better. I agree that it's great he isn't suffering from the same insecurities that some other teens are, because I'll be real, I had a great time in middle school because I was just naturally confident and wasn't very self-conscious as a person. That was good for me. I liked that. And that can be really great for a lot of people who have that experience. But don't let that fool you into thinking he's never going to have to find himself, or that he's this static guy who can't change. What if, God forbid, one day Austin decides he doesn't really vibe with Christianity anymore? Would you support him finding himself in his own religious beliefs? And maybe Austin will stay Christian forever. Who knows? That's up to him. But what if? I just don't like this false characterization of autistic people as these static forces in our lives who never change. We're dynamic human beings just like you, Scott. The next paragraph was really helpful in unpacking some things about myself, okay? Regardless of what a person looks like, where he or she comes from, how old the person is, or how much money he or she makes, or what kind of car the person drives, Austin will offer instant and complete friendship. I have noticed over the years, however, his closest friends do happen to be the prettiest girls around. So, couple things here. First of all, relatable in the sense that I make friends very easily too with lots of different kinds of people. But it was this sentence at the end that got me thinking. I have noticed over the years, however, that his very closest friends do happen to be the prettiest girls around. I was having so much trouble understanding this sentence. What did Scott mean by this? This is what I mean when I say the book isn't autism friendly. I read this paragraph out loud to Tyler and asked him what this sentence meant. Like, was it kind of weird that Scott is talking about how beautiful these teen girls are? Or is that not what he means by it? What is the impact of Austin making friends with lots of pretty girls? What is he trying to say about Austin or about the landscape? Like, what is this trying to say? He never expands on it. Tyler was able to give me some context from his not autistic perspective. He told me that maybe what Scott means by that is that since Austin is currently a young teenager at this point in the book, that it's a time in a lot of boys' lives when they don't make friends with girls that easily. He explained to me that like middle school and early high school, boys and girls often gravitate towards forming friend groups with their own gender. So when a boy has a lot of girls as his friends, it might say something about like how he has a disarming personality that draws in a lot of people who at that age wouldn't be seeking out teenage boys for friendship, but that Austin's outgoing demeanor puts them at ease and makes them comfortable. And I think Tyler's probably right about that. That makes a lot of sense to me. But I was like, what do you mean people gravitate toward forming friend groups with their own gender? I asked because Tyler and I have known each other since middle school, and we've been friends since middle school, and we've been friends with a lot of the same people, both boys and girls, like for the past 20 years. So this is where we both had an epiphany, okay? Back in high school, I used to always accuse Tyler of bullying me. We started dating at the end of 8th grade. We were together throughout high school. We were on and off through college. We got married at 25. That's me and Tyler's story in a nutshell. Back in high school, we had a lot of the same friends, many of whom we're still friends with today, but sometimes a group would get together and I wouldn't be notified or invited, and I would get really upset, and I'd accuse Tyler of bullying me by intentionally leaving me out, or like, are you trying to isolate me from my friends? And he was always like, no, that's not my intention. This moment caused us both to realize that from Tyler's perspective and from the perspective of a lot of our friends as teenage boys, they were like a group of guys just hanging out. This was just guys, and they were like, of course a group of guys would just hang out together. But from my perspective as an autistic girl, I was being intentionally left out. I'm actually really bad at picking up on gender roles and stereotypes, and I often need people to spell them out for me verbatim out loud. And Tyler told me that especially in your teen years, a lot of girls and guys will make friends with their own gender because they might have more in common, and due to socialization might tend to think more similarly. But I'm autistic, so whether someone was male or female did not make a difference to whether I thought similarly to them, because almost no one thought similarly to me except for like a few autistic kids, but not most of them, because most of them were very introverted, and there's a stereotype about autistic people being introverted, and there were just very few autistic extroverts like myself, so I just tried to make friends with everybody, and there was nobody that I really thought more similarly to. It brought back memories of me being a kid in elementary school and having a boy be like, you can't play this game's for boys only, and me being like, in what way does you having a penis influence this recess activity at all? That's literally our only difference. And Tyler's like, yeah, that's a pretty autistic way to respond to that. It wasn't meant to be snarky. I wasn't trying to make an empowering feminist statement. It was a genuine question I was trying to ask, and no one could answer it for me. And it made me wonder also if that's a reason that among the LGBTQ population, many people who are both queer and autistic often are able to realize that they're queer at a younger age, because LGBTQ people often have, you know, at least one quality that goes against the normalized gender roles, whether that's like having a same gender partner or presenting yourself in a different way from your gender assigned at birth. So those of us who are also autistic may start doing those behaviors earlier because we didn't pick up on the normalized gender roles in the first place, because they're often based on vibes, right? So when Tyler was excluding me from hangouts in high school, he wasn't being being sexist. He was just being ableist. I'm just kidding, Tyler. I love you. I'm just kidding. Austen doesn't care if you're a 4-star general or a friend from school or the guy standing behind him at McDonald's, the guy living under a bridge or the king of a country. He loves you no matter who you are or what you do. He's different from anyone I've ever met. His life touches everyone he meets and he doesn't even know it. But if he did know, would it change him? All I know is this one simple thing. He makes people smile. He's a quick little kiss from God, a cool breeze from a different time and place. He's a touch of light. Just because it's one of my stims. A different time and place.
Oh my god. Time and place.
Are you saying, oh my god, time and place?
You did it at my birthday dinner.
Much like the recent book I reviewed, After by Anna Todd, Scott here is writing some Harry Styles fan fiction. He's saying, Austen, you don't know you're beautiful. That's what makes you beautiful. Come on, man. You really think Austen can't perceive that other people are impacted by him positively? You really think he has no idea that his outgoing nature and friendly attitude help him make friends? You really think he's a quick little kiss from God? Not a human being with his own perspective? Come on, Scott. The later parts of this book get just super religious. Scott says things like, my walk continues, and slowly I have sensed the 4 of us becoming one solid, faith-filled body. I do like cliches, and one I've heard many times is the family that plays together stays together. I like this one even better. The family that prays together stays together. My family loves church, and they love me, and I'm starting to understand the connection. I don't like that. Like I said, I think it's fair for Scott to find peace in religion. For both him and Teresa, the church has been a huge and helpful part of their lives, and I never want to take that away from them. What I don't like is that now that their kids are both adults, they say things like, the family that prays together stays together. Are Austen and Logan allowed to explore their own beliefs at all? Again, Scott never says that he'd prohibit them from holding different religious beliefs, but in the book, everything he says is about how much his family as a whole all needs to believe in God together, or else it all falls apart. To which I must ask, what if your kids one day decide that this particular religion isn't for them? Will you be able to maintain your sobriety? I ask because of this paragraph. My sobriety and faith are inexorably linked. I know they cannot be unbound. If one fails, the other would surely follow. I'm glad that religion helped you overcome an addiction. Seriously, I can't overstate how much of an accomplishment that is, and it's great to positively portray sobriety in your book. But I don't think it's healthy to lock yourself into a mindset where if you were to ever change your religious beliefs in the future, it's going to threaten your sobriety. That just doesn't seem healthy. Then at the end of the book, we have a list of resources. Most of them are for religious groups and faith-based resources, but for autism awareness, we get one resource, which is, of course, Autism Speaks. Maybe Scott didn't know how bad Autism Speaks was when he wrote this book, but good lord, man. Promoting Autism Speaks, an organization mostly run by neurotypical people who want to find a cure for autism, rather than a group by autistic people advocating for their own needs. I guess that's kind of on brand for a book that Scott wrote without ever talking to a single autistic adult other than Austen. I mean, the acknowledgement showed that Scott finished writing this book when Austen was 18, so I guess he counts as an autistic adult. But like, why didn't you talk to any autistic people in their 30s or 40s? Why didn't you talk to parents who themselves have autism? Like, why? Why did none of these things cross your mind? If exploring the huge mess that is the Unbreakable Boy has taught me anything, it's that I need to do more writing about my own experiences with disability, both with scoliosis and with autism. I'm currently back in physical therapy for scoliosis right now. I'm about like 2/3 of the way through it, so that's awesome. My back's been fucked this year. That's a lot of fun. If you're wondering why I haven't been posting a lot about my muscle mommy powerlifting journey, it's because I've been trying to get my back to not be swollen and get into, like, I'm glad I'm almost done filming this because I can't sit down for much longer. Anyway, I'm in the process of finishing writing this novel about a girl who has scoliosis, but now I'm considering also maybe writing a novel with like an autistic woman as the main character. I get kind of stuck because I'm like, if I give this character the same special interest as me, will people think she's a self-insert? Because I don't want to write a self-insert, and I don't want people to speculate that like all the things this character does are things that I've done, or that this is a self-insert. I want this to be an independent character, but I also think it would be really fun to give the character the same special interest as me, because then I can just write at length about my own special interests, and like that would be super fun. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Anyway, that was The Unbreakable Boy. I do not recommend the movie at all. The book is much better, and it shows a lot of good intentions on Scott's part that aren't as present in the movie, but there are a lot of parts that show that Scott still has a long way to go when learning how autism affects different people. I'm curious what all of your guys' thoughts were on this book and movie as well. If you saw the movie, if you read the book, or if you've heard anything about it, please let me know your thoughts on that. I will see you guys again in a couple weeks for more videos, but if you just finished watching this video and you're like, no, I want more of Savvy right now, then come down to the McCormick Place Convention Center right now in Chicago and come see me at C2E2. I'm at booth 236, I believe. I'll issue a correction on screen if that's different now, but yeah, come see me, get a signed book, get a friendship bracelet, take a picture together. We'll have fun. Bye, friends!